Alright guys, welcome back. We are going to start Unit 2 today of our World History curriculum. Unit 1 was all about the Age of Revolutions. We looked at the causes and effects of the revolution, like the American and the French Revolution and so forth. We looked at the rise and fall of Napoleon. In this unit, Unit 2, we're going to look at another kind of revolution, but this one's not about battles or political ideals. Rather, it's about technology. We call this the Industrial Revolution. And this is a topic that has tremendous import. I mean, it impacts your life in almost every facet of what you do is impacted by the Industrial Revolution. Now, the thing about the Industrial Revolution is it's not something you can kind of really well define, like it began on this year and ended on that year, because you could argue it never really ended. And its starting point is also kind of hazy as far as what really constitutes it. But what we can say is it began in one place, and that is Britain. So we're going to focus today on the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, kind of why it started in Britain. So we're going to look at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Later in our next video, we're going to talk about the spread of industrialization, and then we'll work our way through all these topics in the coming videos. All right, so let's look at the causes and effects of British industrialization. And before we talk technology and trains and steam engines and all that, we need to talk a little bit about farming, the so-called Second Agricultural Revolution. That's going to be our first main idea. So let's look at its causes and effects. So as we get into the 1700s, guys, what we're going to see is that there are brand new agricultural technologies and techniques. And when you combine these two things, what you have is much greater food production. So an example of one of these technologies would be the seed drill developed by Jethro Tull. What the seed drill does is it plants seeds in nice neat rows so it's easier to harvest and maintain the crops. In terms of technique, you could point to something like the enclosure method, where fields that have been held kind of in common among the peasants are going to be basically enclosed with fences, and these privately owned fields are going to turn out to be a lot more efficient, and food production will go up. Another good example of technique would be crop rotation, so that soil doesn't become exhausted. You rotate the crops that you grow in the same field. That way, this field stays vibrant and can produce a lot of food, basically. All right, so let's look at some effects now of this increased food production and farming. Well, number one, the population of Europe is going to grow pretty rapidly. And as it grows, you're going to see a lot of people moving from rural areas, that means the countryside, into urban areas, that means the city. And one of the main reasons for this is there just isn't as high demand for farmers, because with new technologies and techniques, we're so efficient, we don't need as many people on the land, and so those people are going to be moving to the city, and there they'll find jobs in the factories we're going to talk about in a couple minutes. Alright, so let's get into Britain and why they were the ones leading the way in industrialization. So let's look at the factors. Number one factor, Parliament, that's the legislature of Britain, is going to pass a lot of laws that were seen as pro-business and pro-trade. And with that increased trade, which means increased money coming into Britain, people have more money to invest in new businesses, and it just spurs everything and gets it kind of off the ground. So we see this trajectory. Well, I guess there are ups and downs, and in general, trade is going up and up and up throughout the 1700s. All right, our second factor as to why Britain's going to lead the way would be natural resources. Britain was blessed with lots of coal and iron ore, and also lots of rivers for transportation. And they're also going to build a lot of canals to kind of supplement their natural waterways. So Britain has a lot of the raw materials, and they can move those raw materials around efficiently. A good example of one of those rivers would be the famous River Thames that runs through London. Here's a surviving British canal. Again, the British are going to construct several thousand miles of canals during the Industrial Revolution. I love this one. It is what we call a canal bridge, where you have one canal literally going over another canal, which I think is pretty awesome. All right, another reason the British are going to be at an advantage is the so-called Atlantic economy. Britain had, at least until the 1780s anyways, lots of colonies here in North America. They had colonies in the Caribbean, and of course they had trade vessels which could take them all the way around Africa to India and beyond. And so all of this trade going back and forth across the Atlantic is going to create lots and lots of wealth for Britain, because they're getting raw materials coming in and manufactured goods going out, and those colonies will serve as markets for those goods. All right, factor 3, the population of Britain was growing. We talked about why that was a little earlier with better farming techniques and such. This is going to give Britain more people to work in these industrial enterprises and also serve as customers for the products that are going to be created. Factor 4, Britain had a lot of entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs, guys, are people who take on financial risks. Think of someone who opens a business, that's an entrepreneur. And Britain also was blessed with a lot of capital for investment in these new businesses, and much of that capital came from that colonial empire we were just looking at a moment ago. Speaking of entrepreneurs, here's a little gallery of some famous American entrepreneurs. Some of these names you're familiar with. Everybody knows Oprah, right? And you probably recognize Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, and you probably recognize this guy over here as the founder of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. Some of you might recognize this guy as Henry Ford, the founder of Ford Motors, but this guy, I'm going to be willing to bet most of us don't recognize. His name is Sam Walton. Walmart, Sam's Club, okay, Sam Walton. All right, why did Britain industrialize first? Well, we just talked about this. More natural resources, more people, more entrepreneurs. They just have all the advantages going forward. Okay, they have both the labor and the land. The land would include all those things you see right there. All right, now, the Industrial Revolution has to start in a particular industry, and that industry is going to be what we call the textile industry. And if you're not sure what the word textile means, guys, don't let the word confuse you. It just means cloth products. You can think of clothing or any other type of fabric, whether it be carpet or blinds or whatever. It's just textiles. So let's get into the textile production and see how this contributes to the Industrial Revolution. Again, cloth products, that's textiles. So the Industrial Revolution didn't invent textiles. Obviously, people weren't running around naked for thousands of years until the 1700s. But where did those things come from? And the answer, of course, people made them at home. And there was also the system called the putting out system, where entrepreneurs would deliver the raw materials to peasants. They would then in their home make the finished goods and then basically sell them to the entrepreneur, who would then sell them to other customers. But that's not terribly efficient. What's going to speed up the making of textiles is what's going to speed up everything in the Industrial Revolution. That is machines, mechanization, guys. Technology is the key to almost everything in the Industrial Revolution. And the textile industry is going to benefit from things like the flying shuttle, which is going to speed up weaving. You can see the shuttle there. They called it flying because it was so fast. They could speed it up pretty dramatically. Then there's the spinning jenny, which is going to allow a person to spin lots of different individual threads. So one person now with this machine is doing the work of many people. Then in 1769, we're going to see the water frame invented, and the water frame is going to use water power to spin the threads. So instead of relying on a human turning a wheel, we're going to use the power of water, which, rivers don't get tired, they keep flowing. Then there's the power loom, which is using water power again, but this time to weave the cloth. So we are spinning and weaving like there is no tomorrow. That itself, believe it or not, can be a bit of a problem because you might run low on the raw material. And so in 1793, that part of the problem was solved with the cotton gin. And what the cotton gin does is, of course, it cleans the cotton. The little seeds here, which would have taken a long time to remove by hand, are basically kind of brushed out by this machine, and it's going to greatly increase the production of cotton and the consumption of cotton as well. And when I say consumption, I don't mean people are eating it, of course. I'm talking about the factories using it to turn it into textiles. So these machines we've been looking at, they're big, they're expensive, sometimes they're even a little fragile. So you're going to build something to house these, and that something would be a factory. Okay, so factories are created to house these new machines. And what powers them is not electricity. Okay, this is pre-electricity. It's not even the steam engine. We're not quite ready for that. At first, it was water power. So you would build a factory near a river that's flowing to get even more water power. Oftentimes what you would do is you would dig a canal to divert water off of the river, and then the canal would basically reach a place where you'd have kind of like a waterfall, and the waterfall would cause the water to rush over the wheel quickly, and that wheel is connected via these belts to all these other wheels up here, and it all powers the machine. All right, now it's time for the steam engine, which is going to be probably the #1 invention of the Industrial Revolution, at least the early part of the Industrial Revolution. So if you've never stopped to think about how a steam engine works, obviously it involves steam, right? So what's the process? Well, the process is you're going to boil water to build up steam pressure, and that pressure has a lot of force, and that force can be used, if it's trapped, to push what we call a piston. And the piston rod here can turn a wheel, and that wheel is connected to a belt. So just like the last diagram we saw, you're not relying on water, you're relying on steam. So you're going to burn coal or some other substance to generate lots of heat. You're going to constantly put fresh water in, that water will boil, and then that pressure pushes the piston. Seems very simple, I know, but this was a remarkable invention. Now, James Watt did not invent the steam engine. What he did is he invented the reliable and efficient steam engine. His steam engine will be kind of like the building block of the entire Industrial Revolution. And he's pretty famous, right? The Watt is named for James Watt. All right, let's talk quickly here about transportation. So in 1807, an entrepreneur named Robert Fulton decided to put a James Watt type steam engine on a boat. It's called the Clermont. And there's the paddle wheel, which is powered by steam. You can see the smokestack here. And this Clermont would go up and down the Hudson River in New York State. It would take about 32 hours to go the 150 miles between those two cities, which seems really slow to us because you're thinking, man, that's only 5 miles an hour. What's remarkable about the steam engine, or the steamboat rather, is not its speed necessarily at first. It's not moving all that fast, but the fact that it's going upriver is the key. Remember, before steam engines, guys, going upriver against a stream was very difficult, slow going, and frankly kind of almost impossible. But with the steam engine, rivers become basically two-way highways. Now, if the steam engine can be put on a boat, it can also be put on land. And so a man named Richard Trevithick, a British inventor, came up with the idea of basically putting a James Watt type steam engine on wheels, and those wheels on rails, and you've got the first steam-powered locomotive. In other words, train. Now, the train at first was a bit of an oddity. It wasn't very reliable. It was pretty slow. It was not always efficient. It would break down a lot because, you know, any new technology goes through those stages where you have to improve it and fix all the problems that come with it. But it's going to evolve way more than just going in a circle for the so-called steam circuits. It's going to be used for moving big, heavy objects. And a British guy named George Stephenson is going to open the very first passenger railroad in the world. It went between Manchester and Liverpool in England. Manchester is going to be a major industrial city. Liverpool is a major port city. And so this will allow passengers to go back and forth quickly between those two cities. And when I say quickly, guys, it was so quick, in fact, that the steam locomotive that pulled this train was called the Rocket. Now, this is a replica of what the Rocket would have looked like. Here is the original. It's in a museum. And you can see a version of it right here with your passengers back here. The rocket could go between about 20 and 25 miles per hour, which it seems ridiculously slow to you and I, but think about people from that time period. The world really went about as fast as you could walk before the train, right? 3, 4, 5 miles per hour. So to be able to go 5 times that was amazing, right? This is the equivalent if you could get on an airplane and instead of taking 5 hours to get to the place, it only took 1 hour. I mean, that would be a major jump forward. By the way, the train was also dangerous, and in fact, the rocket was not just the first passenger railroad, it also killed the first person. William Huskisson was killed on the opening day of this railroad. He got ran over by the rocket. Now, the railroad is going to produce just countless jobs, jobs building the trains, building the railroads, maintaining them, operating them, you name it. There's a job associated with the railroad. So it's going to create just an economic boom. And not just in Britain where the railroad started, but all across the world once it spreads to those locations. So a quick little review, guys, of some of the causes we looked at in the Industrial Revolution. We talked about how we've got better farming techniques, which results in more people. We had all these causes as to why Britain led the way, because it had a great navy, it had entrepreneurs, had lots of natural resources, it was located in a good place, it had a stable government. You put all those ingredients together and you had the Industrial Revolution. We also followed that up by looking at some examples of technologies like this the flying shuttle and the water frame and all these other technologies that increase textile production. And then we finished up by looking at the invention of the steam engine and how that was applied to boats and to the railroad. So that is it, guys, as to the dawn of the Industrial Age and our first look at Unit 2.